Hello everyone, Anthony Pelotano here. I personally wanted to spend my day listening to the brand new Clips album, which just dropped, and then going to work. But I woke up, rolled over, checked Twitter, and saw this. Dropped a couple of days ago. I didn't see it because I have not been as checked in to the online left as much. This is enough to bring me out of retirement, if I'm being honest. So, ContraPoints, big YouTuber, makes a post regarding her radio silence on her full take on Israel. And it is it no boy? It's not entirely bad. I've seen a lot of people just completely dismissing it. She makes some points where it's like, but then she immediately goes and just diarrhea of the mouth, it just completely flubs it in a terrible way. So I'm going to be going through point by point, talking about what I think. So let's get this started. She starts off by saying, so many leftists feel betrayed because I haven't made a video on Palestine. Do they actually want a ContraPoints video about Palestine? Will they be happy if I get in the bath and pour milk on a mannequin of Benjamin Netanyahu? No. I've posted about Gaza occasionally. I have quietly given money to Palestinian aid organizations, but I think what leftists really want from me is to join their chorus of anger. They sense some hesitation on my part and are judging me very harshly on my presumed opinions. I'd rather be judged on my actual opinions, so here they are. Is Israel committing genocide in Gaza? Yes. Do I oppose it? Yes. Do I feel angry about it? Yes. I also feel a lot of other things. This is not the worst introduction. It has some issues. I do largely agree. I don't think that her making a big video on the issue is going to have any tangible, meaningful change to the situation going on. But I do disagree necessarily with the course of anger framing. I don't necessarily think that people want her to join a chorus of anger. People more so just wanted sorry, getting over a little bit of a cold. People more so just wanted her to actually say something about the topic, which she now has, and not very well. So, a little sip. Stay hydrated, folks. It's important. It is now time for point 1. Doom. The week after October 7th, it was clear the mood among Israeli leaders and civilians was overwhelmingly kill or be killed. Existential panic and unstoppable lust for revenge. It reminded me of the US after 9/11. There was no reasoning or protesting them out of it, nor was it politically feasible for the US to withdraw aid to Israel on a time frame that would make a difference. It would have required replacing most of Congress and overturning decades of bipartisan strategy and diplomacy. Even in the best case scenario, it would have taken years, so there was a sense of futility, but worse. This point is probably the best that she makes. It's not an amazing point, but it is true. I can see why she holds this sentiment. In terms of allies, the U.S. has some of the deepest, indivorceable, inseparable ties to Israel in terms of allies. A vast majority of people in both houses of Congress people in the last presidential administration, people in the current presidential administration as well, hold a positive view of Israel and will do anything to defend that state. That is not something that you can combat in a year or two. That's not necessarily something that you can combat with a protest movement as effectively as you wish that you could. That doesn't mean, however, that you can just go, well, we can't really do anything, so, it's going to take years, so. And I don't necessarily think that she is saying that she wants to resign herself to just not caring, because there's not anything that she can really do anyway. But as a point, it has merit, but that doesn't mean that she shouldn't be doing anything. This is something that I know. It takes years to shift government policy that is this cemented in the American political ethos. And that, even though it's difficult, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do anything about it. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't contribute. She says that she's donated, which is good. But at the same time, this point does what the title of that point is, doom. It speaks to a level of a feeling of doom that she has that I feel ultimately isn't very useful to everything. You can talk about something that you feel doomer about without incorporating that in, or moreover, even if you feel doomer about it, that doesn't mean that you just shouldn't talk about it. Talk about the things that matter, even if it feels like you are getting nowhere. That speaks to a larger problem that I've had with the online left, especially post 2024. Especially post 2024. It was bad before, and now it's really bad. And it's part of the reason why I have not been posting as much. I'll talk about that in a later video. But it contributes to it. I feel like a sense of doomerism kills political action. While this point has merit, it's not very useful. Now we get to part 2. Misery. The leftist pro-Palestine movement quickly decided that their primary goal was not merely opposition to genocide, but opposition to Zionism in general. I think, as a point, this is really dumb. This point in specific is really stupid. You cannot tackle any genocide, especially from an ideological stance, without actually talking about the ideology that is driving it. You can't. Genocides don't just happen in a vacuum. You don't just look at a country and then it suddenly blows up into a genocide and you're like, Odd Tuesday. No, there's a reasoning behind it, and 9 times out of 10, with almost every genocide that has happened, there is an underlying ideology that is driving it. This is the equivalent, this phrase, the leftist pro-Palestine movement quickly decided that their primary goal was not merely opposition to the genocide, but opposition to Zionism in general. This is the literal equivalent of like going back to the 1800s and saying, the leftist pro-indigenous movement quickly decided that their primary goal was not merely opposition to the Trail of Tears, but opposition to Manifest Destiny in general. Yeah. It's a 1-2 punch. They follow each other. You have to talk about the underlying ideology if you want to tackle the symptoms. You don't. You have to talk about that. This opposition to Zionism that has been birthed out of this current pro-Palestinian movement is something that is useful. Because what else? What else is going to be the driving factor? Israel, like I said before, this genocide is not happening because someone had a bad Tuesday. It's happening because of decades and decades and decades of settler colonialism ramping up, settlements happening in areas like the West Bank where they shouldn't be happening. The fact that any of this is happening, the fact that Israel exists as a settler colonial state that was founded on the back of Zionism as an ideology, as a justifying factor, and is continuing to expand into areas using Zionism as a justification, and then other nations are using Zionism as a justification in order to keep supporting this. No duh that the current pro-Palestinian movement is going to stand against Zionism. That's the issue. So that's dumb. But then she continues on saying the pro-Palestinian movement quickly decided that their primary goal was not merely opposition to the genocide, but opposition to Zionism in general. That is, opposition to the existence of Israel as a Jewish state. And here they decided to draw the line separating decent people from genocidal fascists, which I think had the following consequences. It's this line here that gets me. But opposition to Zionism in general, that is, opposition to the existence of Israel as a Jewish state. That is not what characterizes the modern anti-Zionist movement, pro-Palestinian movement. It's not opposition to Israel as a Jewish state. It is opposition to Israel as a settler colonial state. That is an important distinction to make. If some random island, let's just say brand new island, is created in the middle of the Mediterranean, no one's ever lived there. It's like the perfect size for Israel's population. It's already furnished and everything. It has the buildings and the infrastructure and everything. Let's say that island just popped up in the middle of the Mediterranean and every Israeli just agrees to peacefully move to that, hence so far, this so far uninhabited island that no one's ever been to, no one's ever lived on. It just popped up in the middle. And it's perfect for them. If Israel, as a country, were to just move there, leave its current territory, people in the modern anti-Zionist movement, I would venture to say they wouldn't have an issue with that. The opposition isn't to Israel as a Jewish state, as ContraPoint says here, which is weird and doesn't seem like something Contra would just say out of nowhere. That is a weird phrasing. The opposition isn't to that. It is to Israel as a settler colonial state. A state that relies on entering territory where people already were, forcing them out of that territory violently, killing people violently, taking over land, taking over homes. That is the opposition that people have. That is, these actions, settler colonialism, is not tied to Judaism. These are two separate things. One of these is a religion, one of these is an action. When we acknowledge that and that distinction, then we can actually start making work. But this idea that opposition to Zionism in general, that is opposition to the existence of Israel as a Jewish state, it's not that Israel is a Jewish state. It's that Israel is a settler colonial state. Do not mix up these two things. That causes issues for everyone. Very distinct. Very distinct. It is honestly deeply irresponsible to conflate the two. Anyways, And here they decided to draw the line separating decent people from genocidal fascists, which had the following consequences. It shrunk the coalition. Zionist is a very broad category. Most Jews are Zionists. Anyone who supports a two-state solution is a Zionist. It was politically infeasible. What is the pathway that takes us from the present situation to the dissolution of Israel as a Jewish state? She's saying that again. I don't see how this could happen without either a total internal collapse of Israeli society or else, nuclear war. As usual, leftists championed a doomed cause. I'm gonna speak on this idea of this shrinking the coalition. This is outright false. This genocide and also efforts by people to spread awareness about this and make it clear that this is a genocide has actually changed American public opinion on Israel. So this is an article from Pew Research, and we see here this is very much so at the beginning of this article. As Americans look at the Middle East, fewer say the Israel-Hamas war is important to them personally or important to U.S. national interests. This is an important bit. Than felt that way early last year, according to Pew Research Survey Center. This is from April 2025, so a couple of months ago. In addition, the public's views of Israel have turned more negative over the past 3 years. More than half of U.S. adults, 53%, now express an unfavorable opinion of Israel, up from 42% in March of 2022. So, in the span of 3 years, you've had an 11-point swing against Israel, where that unfavorable opinion has spiked to being more than half of the population at least surveyed in this. That's not insignificant at all. That is the kind of thing, going back to point 1 where she was saying it will take years to change U.S. foreign policy, that's the kind of thing that does change U.S. foreign policy. If the voters are against actions like this in Israel, if the voters are negative against Israel's existence as a settler colonial state and their actions of perpetrating genocide, eventually the representatives and the senators are going to have to follow if they want to keep their position. Public opinion matters. Public opinion has shifted. This idea that we're shrinking our coalition by standing against us is patently wrong. The coalition has expanded. So, I don't know. That point makes no sense considering the data that we actually have about this. Anyways, it introduced dangerous ambiguities. The vagueness of Zionism as a political Satan enables all kinds of rhetorical abuses. On the other hand, right-wing Israelis hold up all anti-Zionist protests as existentially threatening and inherently anti-Semitic. On the other hand, there is a long history of anti-Semites using the term Zionist in deliberately equivocal ways. ZOG, Zionist occupied government, it's a phrase that weirdos use, etc. Anti-Semites are happy for the opportunity to misappropriate the new popular anti-Zionist label to legitimize their agenda, and many people are not informed enough about anti-Semitism to recognize when this is happening. These problems are mutually enforcing. Also, I'm going to say before anyone calls me out, Zionist occupied government is basically, it's literally like, oh, they control the government conspiracy, but they're using the term Zionist instead of Jew. It's anti-Semitism. Anyone who uses the term Zionist occupied government, you should take a double look at. But on this point, I think this is very stupid. Just because there are bad actors who will use a label in order to push bad political viewpoints doesn't mean that you just get rid of the label unless it becomes like entirely occupied as a label, unless like they completely take it over. Like classical liberal, that is a label that is completely taken over. Anti-Zionist isn't. And the thing is about this idea that a lot of people can't differentiate between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and they don't have the knowledge to do that, is a good point. Contra. If only there were a big YouTuber with a massive leftist audience, admittedly, who can clearly recognize the difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and could maybe, I don't know, make a nice, informative video that is guaranteed to get millions of views because that YouTuber constantly gets millions of views on their videos. It doesn't even have to be a long one with like high production value. It could be a short 15 minute video about the difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and how to identify anti-Semitism when it's trying to masquerade as anti-Zionism. If only there were a YouTuber that had the ability to make a video like that, that would get spread to a lefty audience, and maybe teach some people who could then teach other people, and then other people and other people. If only that YouTuber existed. If only that YouTuber existed. Spread the knowledge. Like, I get it. She doesn't want to make a video on this topic. You could legitimately just make like a 15-minute explainer. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't even necessarily have to fit with like the rest of your videos. You could just fucking put it up for a couple of months, take it down. Who knows? Unlist it, put it in a special playlist or something. And you could help solve an issue that you've identified. You have the resources to do it. Why not do it? Good lord. Okay. Point 3. The online left has spent the last 20 months distributing hundreds of photos and videos of dead Palestinian children. The main effect of this has been to create a population of people in a constant state of blood-boiling rage with no consequential political outlet. I fear this may be worse than useless. Anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are conceptually not the same. Yeah, thank you. And conflating them is dangerous, but in practice, the way Israel is perceived does seep out into attitudes towards Jews in general. I don't think Jews who feel isolated and wary in the current political atmosphere are simply hysterical or hallucinating. Yes, there is communal trauma and hypervigilance. Yes, there is disingenuous right-wing ghouls dismissing and censoring all criticism of Israel on the pretext of fighting anti-Semitism. But there's also a valid fear of historical anti-Semitic patterns recurring, and that fear gives power to right-wing Zionist claims that only Israel can keep Jews safe. Does this mean that Israel should be criticized and sanctioned? Absolutely not. But it's something I don't want to risk contributing to, if not outweighed by tangible benefits. So I approach the issue cautiously. This isn't the worst of the points that she makes, but it's also bad. It's not the worst, but it's not good. At the very top, where she says, the online left has spent the last 20 months distributing hundreds of photos and videos of dead Palestinian children. The main effect of this has been to create a population of people who are in a constant state of blood-boiling rage with no consequential political outlet. This is actually something that I don't entirely disagree with. I think the way, and I was talking to one of my friends earlier about this, I think the way that a lot of people go about their pro-Palestinian advocacy is deeply damaging and oftentimes exploitative. You have people who will just post photos of dead children and go like, oh, how are you not paying attention to this? You're a horrible person if you're not paying attention to this. And it's like, yeah, people should pay attention to this, but there are ways to go about this that it does not involve just constantly posting and posting and posting and posting and posting images of people who have been mutilated in a genocide. I think past a certain point it becomes a little insensitive. There are ways to raise awareness without doing that. There are more effective ways to raise awareness without doing that. And I gotta be 100% honest, if that is your only form of advocacy in this, if you're just posting like horrific images in order to raise awareness and then you're like logging off and not doing anything else, you're being counterproductive. And it's a little exploitative. Because past a certain point it's like, do you actually care? Or are you just doing this for Twitter likes? Because I feel like if you cared, you would be doing a lot more than that. But that's such a tiny issue compared to the big issue that is the genocide. So, you know, and generally a lot of point 3, especially this idea of people utilizing anti-Zionism and valid fears of anti-Semitism being couched in anti-Zionist rhetoric, that like right-wing ghouls are using this disingenuously to like further support the state of Israel. Right-wing ghouls are going to lie regardless. Even if this wasn't happening, even if there wasn't some massive anti-Zionist movement, right-wing ghouls would still be using this to justify cracking down on freedom of speech in order to support Israel and fight anti-Semitism. They would still be supporting that because they don't need an actual reason to do it. They were going to do it regardless. They would have lied to get a reason to do it, and no one would have cared. The right always lies. That's one thing that you always have to remember. The right always lies, even when their lies don't make any sense. They lied about litter boxes being in school classrooms for some reason. They lied about Haitians eating dogs and cats. They lied about Iraq having weapons of mass destruction back in the 2000s. And if you want a more recent example, they're lying about Iran having weapons of mass destructions this year. Mass destruction this year. This idea that we should operate in that we should like change the way that we interact with this topic is true. We could be more productive on this. I agree wholeheartedly. But this idea that we should freeze up and kind of that we should freeze up, and one of the main reasons for that is because of the fact that right-wing ghouls will use it to justify their BS, is ridiculous. Right-wing ghouls are always going to do that. They're disingenuous right-wing ghouls for a reason. They lie. Always trust that. And then on the topic of people, specifically Jewish people, being scared about potential recent rises in anti-Semitism, which some people, a lot of people, unfortunately do couch in anti-Zionist rhetoric. That is something important to address. I don't think that that is a marker against the movement against this genocide as a whole. We can talk about that. we should talk about that. That's not the crux of this movement. That's not what people were asking you to do. People weren't asking you to be anti-Semitic or anything. They're asking you to make a statement against a genocide happening. At most. At least, I should say. So I don't necessarily think that that's congruent. If I'm making sense. I'm a little tired. And I have notes, but I am doing this kind of off the cuff. So yeah. Again, this one wasn't the worst point, but largely don't operate off of what disingenuous right-wing ghouls might twist your operation into being. They don't have to have anything to twist. They will just lie if they aren't giving anything. So you might as well operate and work as best as you can. Because they're going to do it anyway, so you might as well do the work. Okay. Last part. 4. Bitterness. Much of the online left has spent 2024 single-mindedly focused on Palestine and the complicity of Democratic politicians in sending aid to Israel. This campaign has had the following effects. 0 Palestinian lives were saved. Not one fewer bomb or bullet was fired by the IDF. It also had another effect. U.S. views of Israel changed. So it did something. It certainly did something. Anyways. Not one... Oop, hold up. That was a bad move. Of the camera. Okay. It may have slightly contributed to the re-election of Trump, guaranteeing that the U.S. will guaranteeing that the U.S. will put no diplomatic pressure on Netanyahu for at least 4 years and making protests against Israel both riskier and less effective. Trump is also, incidentally, a menace to me and basically everyone I care about. A perfectly enlightened being would feel no bitterness about this, but I do. On the topic of this contributing to Trump winning re-election, I fundamentally disagree with that. I don't think that's why. I volunteered for the Harris Walls campaign. I have shirts. I met Tim Walz. I don't think, in my heart of hearts, that the pro-Palestinian movement tangibly harmed Harris's campaign in any meaningful sense. I think Harris's campaign was harmed by a number of factors. I'm planning on doing an election post-mortem one day because I was so involved and I would like to give my opinions on what happened. But if I'm being honest, I can chalk it up right now at least to 3 points. Biden's selfish and stupid attempt to seek re-election and his White House's... And the Biden White House, along with the Democratic establishment, their inability to see the writing on the wall that man was not doing well and was barreling towards a catastrophic election defeat. They should have identified that in 2022, if I'm being honest. He should have stepped down in 2022, if I'm being honest. I largely blame Biden. 2. Harris being coronated only months before the election campaign was... before election day. Presidential elections take years. They take years. There's a reason why you're seeing people like Ruben Gallego or AOC or Pete Buttigieg or Tim Walz already in Iowa campaigning. We are 3 years out from the next presidential election. 3 years and some change. There is a reason why they're already in Iowa. There's a reason why Tim Walz put on the Jim Clyburn freaking humiliation shirt. People are already running for the presidency 3 years ahead of time. Harris had a handful of months after uncertainty that Biden was going to stay in the race. That's a big issue. She couldn't create enough of a national profile, especially since she spent the 4 years that she did as vice president doing nothing. She got veeped. She was our Selena Meyer. She got veeped. She did nothing. Okay? And then the last thing is that people were disillusioned with the Democratic Party generally, both due to the Biden BS, but also just due to the general anti-incumbency wave that we were seeing during that era. People were voting out incumbents to and fro. A lot of them ended up getting saved by the election of Trump. So we're seeing that in Canada. Canada got delivered due to the fact that Trump got elected and suddenly the Liberal Party didn't seem so bad compared to Pierre Poilievre. We saw that in Australia, where the Conservative Coalition, or the Liberal Coalition, because they're weird and their Conservative Party are the Liberals, but their Conservative Coalition just they fizzled out. There was a massive anti-incumbency wave across the world post-COVID, because a lot of parties were still dealing with the after effects of COVID, but they weren't there long enough to actually fully recover the economy, because it takes a while to get an economy back jigging and going after, like, get it jigging, get it dancing. After a global pandemic, we weren't fully recovered. People were angry about that, and it didn't help that we had a president who was senile. At least looked senile. And as far as I'm concerned, even if you ain't senile, if you look and you act senile, you're senile to the eyes of the public. So, yeah. Continuing on. None of this is the fault of Palestinians, of course, who are overwhelmingly the victims here. I hope that someday American policy will shift in their favor, and I will continue to support that cause. Too long didn't read. I see the situation as bleak, intractable, extremely divisive, and devoid of any element that would be appropriately transformed into political entertainment. That's why I haven't made a video about it. Hopefully it goes without saying that these are just my thoughts. I'm sure other quote-unquote bread tubers have different opinions. I did, and I do. And this brings me to the ultimate thing. You, Contra, buddy, you didn't have to post this. For someone who is so keyed into the way that the internet works, knows how people would respond to something, especially something this heavy and poorly written, you didn't have to make this post. It feels deeply irresponsible, not from like even a political perspective, but from a personal mental health perspective, to make a post that was this bad, difficult to parse unless you're being the most charitable of charitable, which I am trying to be. And I didn't even really see anything where I was like, that was actually a really good point. Like, all of these points had something where I was like, this is kind of dumb. Like, I get it, but this is a bad point. This post didn't need to be made. We are almost 2 years out from October 7th, I believe. I believe that was 2023 that happened. It was either 22 or 23. I'm pretty sure it was 23. Let me Google that just to make sure that I'm not tripping. Yep, 2023. We are almost 2 years out from October 7th. In those 2 years, you could have made a post at any time, and you didn't. You didn't have to make a post now. even if you fired off the most pro-Palestinian post ever that you could, it still would have been too little too late. I personally thought that Contra was staying radio silent because she didn't see much to add to what everyone else was saying, and that's fine. Nothing, and I'm gonna be 100% honest. Nothing is entirely wrong with seeing something and going, "This is heavy. I don't necessarily want to talk about it in the moment." Trust me. Look at my uploads. Listen, I am a proponent of when the going gets tough, the tough gotta leave sometimes. Nothing is wrong with taking a break for your mental health. Nothing is wrong with checking out of politics for your mental health. I've done it before. I will probably do it again one day. Who knows? You gotta do what you gotta do for your own mental. And you don't owe the internet anything of a statement if you do not feel like giving it. Just because you are a public figure does not mean that you always have to say everything about everything and have an opinion about everything. You should have an opinion about this because it's a genocide. But, like, I got why you didn't do it. But now I'm sitting here and I've read this post and I'm more baffled than anything. That after all this time, almost 2 years, this is the best response that you could come up with. This? There's nothing here. It is full of misinformation. It is full of various admissions that you are heavily emotionally invested in this as a topic in a way that is deeply unhealthy and characterizing your opinions, and you didn't think to work through a little bit of that before you made the post. It is entirely too late to say anything about this. Like, ship has sailed. The ship sailed a while ago. Especially if you're going to be saying something like this. It comes off as an attempt to feign nuance in order to mask ignorance, is the best way to put this post. Hey, here's my nuanced take that does not understand this issue, that does not imply any understanding of this issue, but acts like I know when I don't. And you can see that in issues such as opposition to Zionism, aka opposition to Israel as a Jewish state. Like, no, this is painful. This is a painfully bad post. This is such a bad post that I read it, got out of bed, sat down at my laptop, set up OBS, not laptop, my brand new desktop. Just got a new PC. Set up OBS. I didn't even change clothes. And now I've talked about it for the past 45 minutes, because this is how much it baffled me. So don't say ContraPoints never gave you anything, because you brought me out of my retirement. Anyways, y'all, real talk, I was planning on returning next week. If you've watched this far, thank you, because I feel like I've been rambling a lot of the time. I'm planning on coming back by the end of the month. Like I said, I just got a new PC, so a lot of the thing that's been stopping me from returning have been tech issues, personal issues, and tech issues. A lot of my personal issues are actually like solid now, thankfully. Uh, and now that I have this, it seems like my tech issues are gonna be going away. So expect more out of me soon, I guess. And thank y'all for sticking by me after all this time. So, I'm gonna listen to the new Clips album, and I'm gonna go get ready for work. Y'all have a good one. Peace. Gotta hit the stop recording button.